So this is a demo of how to do a rough design for project 3. So I opened the program Illustrator and I'm saying create new, and I'm going to make it a custom size because we want this to be something that's printable later. So I'm going to make it 12. Well, maybe just to make sure that it's printable, make it 11. And if you print on 12 by 18, that would give you half an inch around it. Make it 11 by 15, let's say. So that's a nice size. Remember, I'm making it for size paper. You might want to call a print place in your neighborhood the moment things open up again. In 2 weeks, stores are going to be open. We're in the beginning of May now. So they're opening up everything again in 2 weeks. And we'll be at the tail end of this project then. So you probably could go get it printed if you want it. So you could make it right.
Going back to the classroom?
No.
No, school's gonna be closed till next semester. Even summer, everything stays inside.
So make your, maybe I'll change that. Say make it 12 by 15 or 12 by 16. So if you want to change your document size, I've shown you how to do that. But go into document setup, and you can change it in document setup by saying edit artboards. And then up above on your Illustrator, you can, in your control of the Illustrator program, in your control bar, you can look at the width and the height up here when I edited the artboards. And I had made the width 11, but let's say you want to change that, I'm going to make it 12. Now 12 by 15 is a 3:4 ratio, right? And 12 by 16, oh no, it's the other way around, 3:5 ratio. Whoops, how did that happen? So I don't know, 12 by 15 or 12 by 16 is fine. Whichever one you like. So that is going to be literally the size of my rough. I'm making the size of my rough the same size as my final piece. So then we're going to, this is a design for your final piece. So you definitely have to do some research right away as to what you want to include. So you would be referencing your idea folder or your idea board that could also be done in Illustrator or Photoshop with just ideas, images that you're bringing in for ideas, writings that you might. Now, because I've used Van Gogh before in this class as an example of an artist, and we looked at some of his paintings, I'm going to use him as an example. And I'm using my Wacom tablet here. And I'm just starting to draw. If you want to use layers, you can also use layers for this. So these are all, of course, my options. And I do have my layers up. I'm not even going to worry right now about layers because I want to show you what I mean by an idea board, by a rough, sorry. The idea board would be something that you're referencing as you do this. I'm just going to use my pencil tool and I'm going to say, on this, what is going to be my main composition here? How am I going to design it? So maybe the first layer, I'll make 3 layers. And the first layer will be maybe I'll just draw in some shapes, like some areas. So here, and you could draw in a color if you don't want it later, if you want this to show up underneath as something different than your rough drawings as you draw them in. So possibly this could be included in your final piece, but it doesn't have to be. It's something I want to see that you're planning for your design of Project 3, which is a portrait, but a collage portrait of an artist. So I'm going to choose a color, and maybe I'll make my first I'm just going to draw with a stroke, and I'm going to draw with a red stroke, and I'm going to say, here's where Van Gogh's portrait is going to be. Okay, so I'm just going to write in. Oh, that didn't work very well. So I was on my Wacom then. Maybe I better I'll just use the, so let me start this again. I think it might be easier just to use my mouse for this. Here's where Van Gogh's portrait is going to be. And so I'm going to use the type tool and not try to write it in and say, so you guys can see it. Van Gogh. Okay, so there's the Van Gogh portrait. And the next I might say it's going to be facing that way. So go back to my pencil and say maybe, you know, it'll be facing out that way. Oops. I'm giving that so that you can see where it's facing. And then maybe I'm going to say, I'm going to put a landscape that he was fond of or fond of. So I might do that here. And then maybe his some of like his birthplace here. This isn't for you to copy. Like, Roland, don't think you have to do this, what I'm doing. It's just to show you what I mean by a plan. And maybe here there could be people that he, so I'll type that in. So this is going to be landscape of paintings that he painted a lot. And maybe this one would be his birthplace and his land of origin and his homeland. So / homeland. And then here you could put maybe people, I don't know. I mean, I'm just making this up. People that he people that he was, that were important to him. So come on, stroke. Why isn't it stroking? All right, I'll just copy this one. So I'll call this people. In his life. This is just Van Gogh. Somebody like Pablo Picasso, maybe instead of people, you could put like his castles or his studio, and then people would be down here. Maybe he always had his wives and his girlfriends pose for him. Maybe they could be sitting or reclining here, you know. So you just have to look into somebody's life and what you have lots of room. You could also do it landscape orientation. That might actually be easier with all the things that you have to include. Like with Mark Bradford, his homies in Highmark Park and his mother's, he often mentions his mother's hair salon and how it influenced his life. So, you know, that could be, you could turn this around and do a landscape orientation and have the person, but I think that the artist either has to be kind of central, it could be right central but large in the composition, or looking kind of his face or his head in profile looking towards the landscape or the people that influenced him or that were important to him. So this is a collage portrait. The artist could be looking at us, or it could be looking out over what the things that you want to paint and draw and bring into the painting. And I'll be showing you more examples of this. Last time I showed you examples of the collage style, right? I was showing you pictures. Those of you who aren't here, I can go over it again in a few minutes, but I was just showing you artists who did collage style. Why do we call it collage style? Because they juxtaposed and overlapped and put things into the composition that weren't in a real space. It's not like you were painting a photo of a landscape or a photo of an interior like we were doing in the first two projects. This isn't a real space. This is an imaginary collage space where you put a lot of different elements that you imagine belong together. And in this case, we're using the person to bring all these elements together. You know, the person is the magnet for all of these images. They lived a life that had all of these things in it. People, places, things. Okay, so this is kind of my rough. Now, another thing that I'd like you to think about, and I did bring my Wacom out, is with the way this thing is going to work, like compositionally. How do all these things relate to each other? So there has to be, we talked about movement in the composition. So I'm thinking in this case that I'm gonna lock this layer and I'm gonna draw another layer of what we call compositional dynamics. So I'm locking this layer in Illustrator. Illustrator or InDesign is a great program to do these roughs or these compositional designs in. And you could always, if you have an assignment or a job for somebody, you could always do something like this for them. I think it's really important. So the next layer that I'm going to work on, I'm going to do, and I can name these. So I'll name these rough areas, image areas, let's say rough image areas. And then the second layer, I might call comp dynamics or movements, whatever you want to call it. So the second layer I'm going to do in a different color. I'll pick blue. And no fill, just, this is going to be just movement. So how do I expect things to work? So I've thought to myself, I'm going to do the artist in profile right here. So I actually expect some of the movement to be like that. And then how do I expect these three people to relate to each other? Maybe they just are lined up in some way. So I just go back and forth between them. So here it's more like a row. I'm just making this up. Yours is going to be different than this, but I'm showing you what I expect. How do these people relate to landscape? Well, maybe they don't. Maybe you want Van Gogh to be kind of looking down at the landscape also. So, and these two are going to be superimposed on each other. So there's going to be a lot of relationship. So there's going to be overlap. So show that as an overlapped area. Maybe instead of this is going to be a landscape here, and then you decide, well, I don't really want two landscapes. I'm going to take that out, and this is going to be, I'm changing my mind. I'm going to make this things that were important to him. So hold Command to get one of the selection tools. Not selecting it, great. Oh, I'm on the wrong layer, okay. So you have to go back, unlock, and I'm gonna change this. I'm gonna say important objects to the artist. So now, this is gonna be different. It's gonna be like a grid. So go back up to this layer, and I'm gonna change that. I can go back later. I'm gonna say his favorite something or other, and maybe I better work both layers. So I'm kind of changing it. Now I've changed my idea. You could do that on a different layer on the same layer. These objects could be brought up to, they are on that layer. So I can make them blue or a different color because blue is going to be my, my compositional dynamics. So I'm actually going to bring another object layer. So this is going to be objects. And I'm moving the objects onto that layer. So they're, and I'm going to make them green. So then I can name them. Maybe they're objects that the artists always said they liked in their paintings, or they were very influenced, like some kind of something they kept with them their whole lives, and it was very important. They were very important to them in terms of influence or comfort or, you know, psychological meaning. So that's what I want. I want you to, this is very rough. It doesn't have to be beautiful in any way. This is your plan, and you can use several layers to plan it. So now you might want to start naming these things that you plan to draw and paint in there. So how's the landscape going to relate to these? Well, maybe you decide you want them to kind of poke up over the landscape. So you're thinking about it, so you go like that. So this is going to be kind of a landscape in the background, and you're going to have these objects in the sort of foreground of the bottom. This is just some ideas. What if you decide you want the reverse? Well, in Illustrator, it's perfectly possible to just, I'm going to group this bunch just so I can move it all together. Maybe you decide, okay, I really wanted this to be up here and the landscape, which to be the foreground. This might look a little weird, but if it's a foreground of, let's say you knew that they grew up on grasslands, so you put in grass here. I'm just making this up, and then your objects you bring down. So click, come on, bring down. Maybe you decide that the artist is too big here. You want the artist portrait to be a little smaller and right at the top. So you move that up and you bring that in. You see what I'm saying? You can really plan the areas in Illustrator really easily because it's a vector, and it's so easy to control how big things are in proportions. Plan it before you start to paint it, of course, right? But let's say you were working in Photoshop, and you finally get your rough done. You're pretty happy with what you're going to paint. You know that you're going to paint this. You're pretty happy with what you've chosen as different parts that are going to overlap and be on layers. On a layer in Photoshop, you can make things, and Illustrator, you can make things a little bit less, a little bit more less opaque. So you could actually do a little bit, you know, you could make it a little bit less important. So in Photoshop, you bring this whole thing, you can place this whole thing right on the bottom layer in Photoshop. And then you can do a sketch over that. Like, let's say you were working on the portrait part, and you bring this in as your bottom layer in Photoshop. So you literally just place it. We've done that. We worked Illustrator drawings into our Photoshop. Remember, that was our last project? And I said, put your Illustrator drawing into your Photoshop layer. So you could just bring this whole plan in and then start to draw. And you don't have to draw the whole thing on one, you shouldn't. You should not draw the whole thing on one layer. You should start with the portrait. And then you can do it again if you don't like it the first time, right? And it doesn't interfere, because in Photoshop, if you don't do things in layers, they get stuck together. So it's harder. You'd have to select it and move it to another layer. So why not like work the portrait on one layer in Photoshop, then work these on another layer, work these on another layer, work that on another layer. So now we're using layers to just be parts. We're not doing it as much inside out. We're not working in a real space. We're not imitating a real space anymore. We're working in an imaginary space. We're doing a collage. So it's an imaginary space that we're creating. So maybe you decide, well, now there has to be some kind of movement between these two. So how can I get these objects to relate to the landscape? I personally like the idea of the objects maybe being at the bottom better. But maybe your landscape could kind of come up over the objects. So you really have to plan it ahead of time. What's it going to be like? You can't, you know, it's harder once you've actually painted or drawn something to start modifying it. You probably will modify it later, but to have a plan is the best. Then you think, well, that's kind of boring. I have these objects lined up. Maybe I don't want them so lined up. Maybe that's really too boring. So I'm going to move a person. I'm going to make one of these people come down here. And I'm going to put one of the objects there. Then start naming the people. Like the most important person to Van Gogh was this person called, well, it was Theo, his brother. His brother supported him his whole life monetarily and everything, and bought his paintings, and Van Gogh wrote letters to his brother. So maybe you want Van Gogh's face and then his brother to kind of loom up below it. And, or you know, want him to be looking directly at his brother, so you make the brother right next to him, right there. So then you put, in this case, Theo. That was the most important person in his life, definitely. And then the next most important person was Gauguin. So maybe Gauguin and Van Gogh, you could kind of show their relationship here. So this is Gauguin. Gauguin was an artist. Theo was his brother. So you could put brother. So see how I'm starting to work out the hierarchy? The hierarchy of a piece is how important things are. So hierarchy in a magazine article would be the name of the magazine. That might be a little less important to people than the headline, the main headline. So you have main headline. Then the second thing would be name of the article, name of the magazine or newspaper on top. Then the third thing would be all the headlines on the bottom. Well, that's kind of what we're doing with this. We want to establish a hierarchy. What's most important? What's second? What's third? What's fourth? And there doesn't have to be just one thing. Remember that on the third level could be several things. I established, pardon me? Felicia, did you say something? So now that I've moved things around, I kind of have to do a different diagram of how things are working. So Van Gogh is still kind of looking out. I'm going to do Van Gogh in 3/4 here. So he's looking at us and he's looking this way. All right. So I'm going to sort of draw his profile in a minute. He's looking that way and looking out at us. So, and he's kind of looking, yeah. So I'm going to have to change my diagram a bit. Maybe you want him to be 3/4 with his hand, you know, moving towards Van Gogh or Gauguin, something like that. So I'm going to diagram it a little differently now. taking my Wacom tablet. Actually, in Illustrator, there's a, Stephanie would know. I think it's in brushes. There's one that has arrows.
Illustrator?
Yeah, is there a brush in Illustrator that has arrows? I think so. Would it be borders or something like that?
I'm doing my sketch already.
Remember which one had the arrows at the end? It had arrow ends. Oh well. Arrows, there it is. Wonder if the program heard me say that. Okay, so I really want to keep going with, let's say this one. Let's see what it looks like. So I'm making it a little bit fancier for you to see. So I don't have to draw my arrows. I can actually have the program show them. No, I want it the other way. So here would be both ways. This is just so you communicate with me, right? About how you think of this as relating. My computer is running out of juice. Hold on a minute. Here it goes. Okay. So this is very, these two things, what I'm saying here is these two things relate to each other. These two things should have somehow be related. And Van Gogh, somehow these two should be related. So there should be a sense of movement through the composition. What's the weather going to be? You could decide here, what, you know, is it going to be sunny or cloudy? You're going to have a storm brewing. I mean, you could kind of symbolize his emotion by showing both sunny, like a cloud, like a sun coming out from behind a cloud or something like that. So you could draw that in or just designate what the weather is going to be. So I'm going to draw another box. And this case, it's going to be the red color again. Great. Okay. So today, you can't exactly do this diagram until you figured out what are some of the things you might include. And for every artist, it's different. Our lives are not the same. People have kids, some people don't have kids. People have husbands and wives. Some people don't have husbands and wives. They have brothers and sisters, or they have a best friend. Some people have very, very important pets.